Most people assume closeted people skip the holidays because they don't like family gatherings. But that isn't what usually hurts the most. The hardest part isn't showing up. It's deciding which version of yourself deserves a seat at the table. Every holiday becomes an emotional negotiation. How much truth can you afford today? How much of yourself has to disappear before everyone else feels comfortable? Quietly, without anyone noticing, the invitation that feels warm to everyone else can feel like a countdown to emotional performance. Because for many closeted people, the holidays aren't simply about celebration. They're about survival. And survival has a strange way of disguising itself as choice. You tell yourself you're too busy, that traveling is expensive, that work got in the way, that you're tired. Sometimes those reasons are true, but sometimes they're protecting something much older. A fear that one wrong conversation could collapse the fragile balance you've spent years maintaining. People often imagine coming out as one dramatic moment. Reality is usually much quieter. It looks like editing every sentence before it leaves your mouth. It looks like rehearsing answers to questions nobody has asked yet. It looks like scanning every room before deciding how much of yourself is safe to reveal. That changes people. Over time. Eventually, emotional hiding stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like your normal personality. And that's where the holidays become psychologically dangerous. Because holidays revolve around memory, family traditions, childhood stories, photos, questions about your future, questions about relationships, questions about marriage, questions about children, questions that sound innocent, until every answer requires another version of yourself. Every family has invisible rules. Some are spoken. Many never are. You learn them through silence, through facial expressions, through jokes everyone laughs at except you, through conversations that suddenly become uncomfortable when certain topics appear. Children notice those things long before they understand them, especially children who already feel different. So they begin collecting emotional evidence. What happens when someone mentions a gay celebrity? How does everyone react when a cousin comes out? Who changes the subject? Who laughs? Who looks disappointed? Who stays silent? That evidence becomes a map. And many closeted people spend years navigating life using that map. Not because they're dishonest, because they're observant. There's a difference. The world often celebrates authenticity, but authenticity feels luxurious when safety has never been guaranteed. So instead, you become adaptable. You become emotionally multilingual. One personality for friends, another for work, another for family, another online, another offline, until you can switch identities so quickly that even you stop noticing it. Social media quietly intensifies this conflict. During the holidays, feeds fill with smiling family photos, matching pajamas, engagement announcements, happy couples, perfect dinners. Everyone appears emotionally included, even when they aren't. The algorithm rewards visible belonging, cannot measure invisible exhaustion. So while everyone else posts memories, some closeted people are calculating exits. Which invitation should they decline? Which relative might ask uncomfortable questions? How long can they stay before pretending becomes physically exhausting? People think loneliness is being alone. But chronic loneliness often happens in crowded rooms. You can sit beside people who love you and still wonder whether they would love the real you. That uncertainty slowly rewires emotional behavior. Instead of expecting understanding, you begin expecting translation. Every conversation becomes editing. Every story becomes filtering. Every laugh becomes calculated. Even joy becomes monitored. Because emotional hypervigilance doesn't disappear simply because the room contains familiar faces. Sometimes familiarity makes it stronger, especially if those familiar faces unknowingly taught you what not to become. That's the contradiction. Home is supposed to regulate your nervous system. But for many closeted people, home activates it. Your body remembers old emotional equations. Don't say too much. Don't sound suspicious. Don't react too strongly. Don't mention them. Don't correct anyone. Don't make this complicated. Eventually, you stop protecting secrets. You start protecting everyone else's comfort. And that is a very expensive emotional habit. Because every relationship asks one silent question. Can I exist here without editing myself? If the answer keeps becoming no, distance begins feeling safer than connection. People sometimes interpret holiday absence as rejection. They think, they've forgotten us. They don't care anymore. They've changed. But emotional distance is not always emotional indifference. Sometimes it's emotional oxygen. Sometimes leaving is the only way someone knows how to breathe. Modern culture doesn't make this easier. Dating apps encourage visibility. Social media rewards self-expression. Profiles ask people to define themselves in a few words. Meanwhile, some people still return to homes where even one honest sentence feels dangerous. Imagine living in both worlds simultaneously. Online, you're encouraged to be authentic. Offline, authenticity feels risky. That contradiction fragments identity. Not dramatically, gradually. You become emotionally visible to strangers, while remaining emotionally invisible to relatives. People know your playlists, but not your heartbreak. They know your achievements, but not who held your hand through them. That kind of invisibility creates a unique exhaustion, because hiding isn't passive. It's active labor. It requires memory, consistency, self-monitoring, constant prediction. You're always asking, will this story expose something? Will this photo create questions? Will mentioning this weekend reveal too much? Most people think fear arrives during confrontation. Often, fear arrives long before anything happens. Psychologists sometimes describe this as anticipation shaping behavior. But emotionally, it feels much simpler. You begin preparing for rejection that hasn't happened yet. Not because you're irrational. Because your brain remembers patterns. It remembers every uncomfortable silence, every dismissive joke, every conditional expression of love. Eventually, your nervous system stops waiting for evidence. It assumes it. That's why some closeted people appear distant during the holidays. They're not detached. They're scanning. Scanning faces. Scanning conversations. Scanning emotional weather. Hypervigilance is exhausting because it turns ordinary moments into psychological calculations. Someone asks whether you're seeing anyone. A simple question. For someone else. For you. It branches into 20 possible outcomes. Do you lie? Deflect? Change the subject? Tell part of the truth? Risk everything? One sentence suddenly carries years of emotional history. That is invisible labor. And invisible labor rarely receives empathy. People only notice the absence, not the battle that produced it. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes closeted people don't skip the holidays because they fear rejection. They skip them because they fear acceptance arriving too late. Because every year that passes quietly asks another painful question. What would my life have looked like if I had felt safe sooner? That question has no satisfying answer. Only grief. Grief for birthdays spent pretending. Grief for relationships hidden. Grief for introductions never made. Grief for ordinary experiences that never felt ordinary. People often imagine grief as losing someone. But grief also appears when you realize how much of yourself never had permission to exist. That's why certain holiday songs suddenly hurt. Why old family photos feel strangely distant. Why traditions can become reminders instead of comfort. Not because the memories were fake. Because they were incomplete. There is another contradiction few people talk about. Some closeted people genuinely love their families. Deeply. They laugh together. Care for each other. Support each other in countless ways. And still feel psychologically alone. Love and emotional safety are not always the same thing. A family can provide one without knowing how to provide the other. That complexity confuses outsiders. They expect villains, heroes, simple explanations. Real life rarely offers them. Sometimes everyone is trying their best. Inside emotional systems they inherited rather than consciously created. That doesn't erase the pain. It explains why the pain becomes so difficult to name. The deepest human need isn't constant attention. It isn't endless validation. It's emotional rest. The ability to enter a room without calculating yourself first. Without translating your identity. Without rehearsing harmless answers. Without wondering whether love depends on continued silence. Emotional rest is what many people experience during the holidays without ever realizing it. For others, it remains a distant idea, and maybe that's the hidden psychology behind skipping the holidays. It isn't always about avoiding family. Sometimes it's about avoiding the version of yourself you only become around them. Because pretending for one afternoon can awaken months of emotional recovery afterward. That is the invisible cost. Not just hiding who you love, but repeatedly abandoning yourself so everyone else can experience an easier version of you. Quietly, year after year, until one holiday arrives, and staying away feels less lonely than showing up. Not because connection stopped mattering, because surviving stopped feeling like living. And once you recognize that difference, you can never unsee it.